Hey there, and welcome to a very special episode of That News You Care About. Today is Tuesday, December 29th, 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. And joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Cheers to ending this year.
Cheers! Yes, this is the last, unless some giant breaking news happens before Thursday. This is the last episode of News You Care About of 2020. We made it, everybody. We did it. We did the darn thing. So Trevor, first off, how was your holidays? How was your Christmas?
Pretty relaxed, pretty chill.
Yeah.
Spent a good chunk of time gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Finished
Same.
a couple games.
Yep.
So it was cool. One of which may have snuck its way into my top 10 games of the year list. That will be coming out soon. I got my it's just off camera on the thing, but you can probably see it on the Discord. I got my Oculus
you did it?
Quest.
Okay.
It arrived, so I've been playing around with that a little bit. It is. I need to adjust the headband because I definitely had the VR goggles eyes with it earlier after playing it for some time. Because it was giving me a little bit of a headache. So yeah, I definitely need to loosen it up a little bit. But it's a cool piece of tech, kind of freestanding VR, not needing to be hooked into anything else. So we'll see if anything from that pops its way into Game of the Year stuff. I'm trying to figure out how to effectively stream, or how to effectively put Steam games on it, because it's Oculus instead of the Steam VR. And there's an upload VR article about how to do that, so I'm gonna try and do that and see if I can play a little bit of Half-Life Alyx here before year end. But if not, so be it.
It was a very low key, chill holiday for me as well. It was nice. I had today was my first day back to work. Since the 18th. And even this is it feels like a weird hiatus, because I'm going to work today, tomorrow. I'm going to work until New Year's Eve, basically, and then the company isn't open on New Year's Day.
Yeah.
And then it's my birthday weekend, and so it's a weird 3-day lull and a 16-day period of just not working, which has been kind of nice. I very much needed that break. I played a lot of stuff as well, which we'll talk about over multiple podcasts, I'm sure, and written articles. But yeah, it was just nice. It was very much me and Schraub didn't leave. Our families kind of for the holiday last month are on either coast, so. I mean, we literally did nothing. We stayed in and just sat on that couch basically all day long. We watched a lot of Hell's Kitchen. We got back into Hell's Kitchen as we continue to plow through 18 seasons of that, so that you can get that ranking of all the seasons of Hell's Kitchen. I have a 4,000 word Google Doc that is just a few seasons away from being ready to go. And yeah, it was super nice, super chill. The Oculus VR thing is actually kind of funny because we were watching A Christmas Story, maybe on Christmas Day or something on ABC Family or TBS, whatever, and an Oculus commercial came on for Star Wars, and I got to the end of the commercial and she goes, "You should just get that instead of a PS5. It's cheaper." And I was like, "Well, it's not you know what, I just want it. All right, don't come at me like this. Don't clap back." And she was like, "Star Wars looks neat." I played a lot of games with Schraub next to me too, it's always interesting. I feel getting people's thoughts on things who aren't usually play games. And so the games that she enjoyed watching, the games she didn't. Again, I don't know if I mentioned it. I for sure didn't mention it on the podcast. I don't even know if I mentioned it to you before, Trev. Where whenever I got really into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, eventually Schraub just started sitting down next to me and watching me play it, and she got really into Odyssey. That's her favorite game that she's seen me play. She really liked that. She always wanted me to sleep with everyone, which is very much not how my Cassandra was decked out, but nonetheless she was very fascinated by Odyssey, and then to see the other game that she's not as here for has been an interesting little experience the past few weeks here. But yeah, it was a nice little holiday. Like I said by the time you listen to this, my birthday will be in 4 or 5 days, the 3rd. So I think it's 4. So it's also that. It's exciting. Again, Christmas, New Year's, and my birthday is all within 10 days. It's like a nice little like final holiday rush. But that's not what we're talking about this podcast. We're not looking to the future of 2021 and birthdays and good times. No, we're here to reflect back on the year that has been 2020. It was a year. I think we can all agree on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But we made it. You know what I mean? We're in it. We got like 52 hours left in the year, something like that. And so, as of recording this, and so, me and Trevor thought it'd be a nice little thing, a little bit like the first Christmas episode of Input, a podcast you might have heard of. We decided to go look at the biggest stories of the year. Myself and Trevor each kind of put in a few different big kind of themes and overarching trends throughout the year that we thought warranted discussion. Some bigger than others, some more important than others, but all kind of help define the year in gaming at the very least in 2020. Trev, let's just jump right into it, I think, with the first one that is in the Google Doc here, which is crunch, and the topic and issue of crunch in gaming, which arguably has been one of the biggest topics and themes of 2020 in terms of the games industry.
Yeah, it's certainly been ramping up in recent years, and I think this year kind of hit a new level of it, especially one of our other, like, tying into one of our other big stories, of course, all the Cyberpunk stuff. But even before that, I want to say this is the year that had like the expose on kind of BioWare's crunch culture issues that kind of like were in the lead up to Andromeda and Anthem and all those issues. Obviously, Naughty Dog.
The discussion around Naughty Dog,
Naughty Dog was a huge conversation point over the summer around the time of Tilo 2. And then, most recently, certainly Cyberpunk going back on their word of we're not going to have crunch, and then just having seemingly endless crunch at this point.
I mean, even on the other end, too, right? The discussion around, like, Hades and Supergiant and how they don't crunch in those games. They make a point not to, right? And, like, the discussion of, like, this is a thing that, like, a Game of the Year caliber game can achieve, is to not crunch the entire way through. It is not, like, a mandatory feature of these, like, high caliber AAA games. I think it's been interesting for me to do these kind of year in review podcasts for like 4 or 5 years now, whenever Input first started, and see the issue of crunch steadily become bigger each time. Right? Like, I remember in 2017, it felt like it very much was like me, Jarrett, and George talking about crunch and being like, hey, like, this is a thing that like maybe isn't that great actually, guys. You might not have heard about it. And then see like where we kind of have it, and like when we did like the inputties and it being like a very prominent feature that next year and like the next one, and then this year, I mean, just on this podcast alone, we've discussed the topic of crunch so many times, and it's a weird one where like that's both really frustrating and also so much more encouraging than I feel like where we were even 3 or 4 years ago, right? Like, we're very much not where we need to be at in the industry in terms of crunch on any side, whether it's PR, games development, press, anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that the discussion is becoming more and more press, and the fact that you're seeing these articles talking about how like The Last of Us Part 2 shouldn't win for Best Game Direction, or just all of the exposés, all along from features about numerous studios. The fact that you're seeing people on Twitter share their own crunch stories from game development and from press, I think is a encouraging sign that people are willing to have these kind of conversations and really willing to kind of, I think, talk about the realities of, I think, the brutal nature of being in games at times and just the long hours that you just don't get back. And I think while crunch is very much a epidemic in games all across the industry still, this feels like one of the first years where I really feel encouraged that we are making some sort of progress and we're making some sort of strides in terms of where we're going with the issue of crunch in games.
Sorry, I'm just pulling up one more story that I'm going to try and throw in here that I that obviously was a big story this year that I had forgotten about and should probably be included in the conversation that we'll get to in a little while. But yes, crunch bad. One of the things, especially on that I think I was glad to see as part of the conversation, especially around the cyberpunk side of things, was the idea of the media side of crunch, in crunching, rushing through a game to hit embargo and all that stuff. Obviously, that's something that hasn't really gotten as much of a spotlight because the news tends to not put themselves in the story over time. But the fact that games reviewers are typically working above and beyond their 9 to 5 to play the game, get the game review, like it, the fact that was a conversation around Cyberpunk because of the condensed timeline they had to play and review that for embargo. I was glad to see more people talking about that, even if it felt like maybe it's sparked off of excuse me, a Hard Times article joking about all of the guides people at IGN crunching to get Cyberpunk stuff. And obviously Miranda from IGN kind of came out and was like, here are the things we've put into place to try and, or I've put in a lot of things in place to not do that. But yes, I get that it's satire, but the fact that those kinds of conversations were happening was, I thought, a nice piece of the puzzle that often gets kind of overlooked.
Yeah. I mean, it's one for me of, as like, I think it's a particularly big issue, and there's no really way around it for like sites like ours, right? Where if we do get like early press copies of things and we have to hit an embargo, or we want to hit that embargo, right? And we have a 9 to 5 job, and then essentially the second job of doing this, and we have like a limited amount of time to do it, right? Like it just becomes a thing of like it's just not easy. And even in the best of cases, like you said, even at like an IGN or GameSpot, you're not just given off like a week to play through this game. Like you'll maybe get like a day of just time to dedicate to it, but like you're not going to get like a week or two to play through Cyberpunk or The Witcher or, I mean, even The Last of Us or smaller games, right? Like a Call of Duty, because you have to play this game so thoroughly and so in depth. And I think it's a aspect of it that is just so not touched on, right? And there are a lot of issues in the press side of the game industry, but I think that I'm always here for more kind of acknowledgement of the fact that like the press side of things also has its own issues and also has a lot of very serious issues, and kind of exploitative practices and practices where they kind of take advantage of people, either via the publisher not give them enough time, or obviously the higher ups not giving them enough time or not giving them time off to do it. And so I enjoyed that kind of Twitter conversation and thread, and seeing Miranda make the point to say like, hey, we've really taken steps to adjust this. Obviously IGN is a very different place than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. And so it was nice to see that as well. But enough of crunch. We're tired of crunch. We're done with it.
I wish we were done with it. I have a feeling it'll keep popping up.
I agree, but the next big theme of 2020 is a much more, I think, positive one, which is the kind of discussion of accessibility in gaming. Something that both myself and Trevor, I'd like to think, are very much kind of champions of, and this really did feel like a real kind of breakout year in terms of the like discussion of accessibility in gaming. Obviously highlighted, I think, to some degree by just how many accessibility features The Last of Us Part 2 had, and just how much they kind of consulted people within the like accessibility in gaming community. But so many, Ubisoft doing everything they're doing, like so many games have really made it a point to kind of highlight what they're doing to let as many people as possible play their games and not have really any barriers to prevent that. Yeah.
In particular, it's been really great getting to see people like Steven Spawn and Steve Saylor, the blind gamer.
Steve Saylor,
really get kind of thrust out maybe to the forefront of kind of these conversations and getting more of a spotlight put on them, be it in kind of consulting with Ubisoft or with Naughty Dog for Last of Us Part 2. Or even Steve Saylor had like a great collaboration recently with Xbox for one of their campaigns on the power of dreams and all that stuff. And in particular, I want to shout out Steve Saylor because he had he did one of those tweets that's going around recently of like, before 2020 ends, what's something that you like always wanted to tell me or something. And I basically said, like, as crappy of a year as this has been, it has been great to see him get like a rocket strapped to his back and shot them. The site Can I Play That? Seeing them kind of like pop up in my feed more and more, and getting more access to coverage and all that. I guess even beyond accessibility, and this maybe ties into another one of our stories, but the seeing just diversity and equity and inclusion kind of being accepted more widely in the industry, seeing more Black voices kind of getting access to coverage that they hadn't before. Spawn on Me in particular, or even Zombie Kills, getting to see kind of those people not those people, getting to see them like just get more access, get more coverage, get more of a spotlight put towards them. A lot of it came out of in response to terrible circumstances this year. But at least there was some good, I think, that came out of them, and it wasn't let's highlight these creators for a week and then kind of go back to the status quo. At least in what I've seen, the status quo has shifted, and that's been really cool on the accessibility side as well as the inclusion side.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor already kind of touched on it, but like one of the other topics that we're going to talk about, and we'll just merge it here, I think, is like the issue of Black Lives Matter in gaming, and the kind of promotion and real, I think, progress to some degree, certainly kind of vocal advocacy for more people of color, and just people who really just aren't white men who are straight in their 20s and 30s to review and talk about and podcast and speak about games and write about games, and kind of and obviously we're in our own little chamber and Twitter or whatever, but like it feels like an explosion of just like so many of them getting really good opportunities and being in like the future class for like the Game Awards and getting these like great opportunities to be on, whether it's Kind of Funny or IGN or GameSpot or anything. Like the Black Lives Matter movement over the last few years, and in particular everything that's happened in America since the death of George Floyd, has, I think, it feels like it is a moment in history where like things have just kind of like a pivot point where everything has changed for way bigger things than just video games. But even this industry has unquestionably felt the effects, and it's been so encouraging and so exciting to see these people who we've known and we've been friends with, or maybe we didn't, but have just were always out there grinding, doing awesome work, and really get moments to shine this year, right? Like another one is Cam Hawkins, right? Who like me and you have each known for like years, and just to see him really flourish, like Mario Rivera, like another one, like these people who have always done great work, whether it's at smaller sites, whether they're just doing like stuff on their own, and to see them really shine. I mean, it feels like forever ago, but like, I mean, even Blessin started working at Kind of Funny this year. And so it's like even that, and seeing him really just like do awesome, amazing work at Kind of Funny after all the stuff he did at OK Beast, has been so exciting to see. And I think accessibility in games and every form of what that means, has been something that I think the video game industry was overdue for about 30 or 40 years. But to see what feels like actual progress being made so quickly this year, right? Like this wasn't a one-off thing where like people were put on podcasts, people were invited on podcast, in May, June, July, and then not really kind of followed up on. Like there's been real follow-up on so many different sites, so many different podcasts, so many different shows since then. Again, like the future, like I said, like the future class at the Game Awards, I think really highlighted a lot of people of color and a lot of people who maybe wouldn't have been featured. Again, a big theme of this episode seems to be 3 or 4 years ago even. Right? Like just how much the industry has changed in that time span. has been so exciting to see, right? And like this is even tied into like larger conversations around like who should review certain kinds of games, right? Like whether it is like the conversation of like who should be reviewing games like Ghost, right? And like should there be more like Asian American representation in the reviews process for like that kind of game, or Japanese American representation, right? And I think these are the kind, or like Yakuza, obviously another one, where like these are the kind of stories there where like these people, all people, have their own unique perspectives and experiences and lives that they've lived, and the ability to highlight more voices and highlight more of those experiences and highlight more unique and diverse perspectives only makes the entire collective stronger, and only makes the conversation and discussion around games and their stories and their impacts and their themes and what they got right and what they got wrong better, more honest, and more true to the experiences of everyone that is actually playing these games. And so that's something that I very much find exciting, and encouraging, and I expect it, and will be continuing to help push it to be better and more so next year as well.
Yeah, I think on all of these kind of things we've touched on so far, like the conversation has been bubbling there under the surface for years. Like I remember back when I like started really applying for jobs at like places like IGN, I was applying to places like that while at the back of my head always saying like, but I'm just another white, like I'm another middle-class white guy. Like the industry doesn't really need more of me. I would gladly give up my spot to see other voices kind of elevated and more diverse voices elevated. And so I remember like thinking that years ago. And so the fact that we had like a breaking point this year with everything else going on in 2020, seeing some of these kinds of like, it seems like we really hit a tipping point in a lot of these areas, that hopefully doesn't just, go back to a status quo when we're allowed to leave our houses again or something like that.
2020, I mean, I'll definitely touch on this again at the end of the episode, but 2020 has been a year of a lot of trauma and I think pain and tragedy, unfortunately, for so many different reasons. But it also seems like a moment where we are poised to really make a lot of headway on a lot of issues. Again, both within the video game industry and very much outside of it. And as terrible and awful as the year has been, it does feel like we've begun to really make some of that progress, right? Like another area that we didn't touch on is like the issue of like LGBTQ people in games, and outside of it, and like the representation of them and like again these kind of discussions and these kind of issues also being brought more to the forefront, and also again these discussions of like what should your staff and what should your team look like, at various kind of newsrooms and outlets across the industry and dev teams across the industry, and I am hopeful that this time next year the video game industry as a whole will look much more representative of the people who play games. Because there are a lot of people out there who will not let it be so, who will be demanding every day that it reflect everyone who plays games, and not just, a kid from Phoenix, Arizona, and a kid from Nixon, Missouri, who are pretty pale, and also pretty male. And so I think that's one of the most encouraging things I've seen from 2020 so far. We will shift to the next topic, though, which is a more lighthearted one, I would say, a more soap opera-esque story, which is the continuing saga of Cyberpunk 2077. Another, again, just like Crunching Games, a much talked about topic on News to Care About. This definitely gets the Billy Mitchell Award for 2020, I think, for News to Care About. It is just a mess. I mean, like, there's only so much we can really say at Cyberpunk at this point. Me and Trevor have spent countless hours talking about this game over the course of this year. But it has been amazing to watch a game just, I think, fail so spectacularly, so unnecessarily, throughout the course of the year, and just like have so many unforced errors that it just didn't ever need to have.
Yeah, I mean, even counting it as a failure, is a very specific look at what has gone on with Cyberpunk 2077.
Sure.
Because again, like as we touched on, I think last week,
13 million copies
13 million
sold.
copies sold and counting. So like the game is a massive financial success for CDPR.
Oh yeah,
it could have been bigger, probably.
yeah.
But yeah, it it has been a ton of unforced errors and issues that should not have arisen. They've I think lost a lot of their goodwill. That you know our industry and the gamers TM are a fickle bunch and could very easily be swayed back if Cyberpunk basically says, hey, you know what, we screwed up, so you were already going to get a whole bunch of free DLC from us, but we're also going to give you the expansions that we had planned for free too. If they end up doing that, a whole bunch of people are going to be like, well, water under the bridge, no big deal. And that's like the unfortunate short-term memory of our industry, is that there will be a buttload of people who will be like, that's good enough for me. Yep, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But I hope the industry as a whole kind of learns some lessons from this, and not like the wrong lessons. Not that like, oh, let's crunch and then maybe we'll sell a $13 million or 13 million unit game too. I hope that like kind of the reckoning that maybe CDPR is kind of felt in the press side of things, in the bad press and in the uproar around the game, causes people to rethink things.
Yeah. I agree. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on Cyberpunk. It is just a lot. If you want to hear me and Trevor talk about it, there are probably a dozen episodes of this show to listen to.
I mean, it certainly feels like that, but it's really only been like a month since everything really started blowing up on CDPR.
But there are lots of stuff that you can go listen to. But yeah, it is very much a just bizarre story. I feel like the more I just learn about everything around that, the more I'm just like, it didn't have to go like this. You could have just, but nonetheless, I will cut myself off before I even get into it. Moving on, when putting together this list, Trevor, this was the thing that came to me last. Like, I had just so forgotten about it and how crazy this year has been, which is there were new video game consoles this year that came out.
Yeah.
We're in a new generation of gaming. And it just was like, it is just in the midst of everything else that's happened in 2020, that feels a little buried at times. But we are here. We made it. We're like a month and a half roughly into the next gen of gaming.
Yep.
Trevor, give me your report on the ground. How does it look over there?
I mean, so that's the thing, is like you forgot about it because it's been really hard to get access to the next gen of gaming. Even if you have Wario 64 tweets, just notifications on, like I see every day, and I don't have them on anymore, but I still see them in my feed every day of like, 5 minutes ago, cheap video game deals, or Wario 64 post, a Target link or a Best Buy link or something like that of like, hey, PS5s are available. Good luck. And still it seems like nobody's been able to really like. Nowhere near the amount of people that want them have been able to get their hands on the systems. And it's unfortunate that, on the flip side, scalpers and bots are also gobbling up inventory and then reselling them on eBay for, ridiculous amounts of money. As far as the consoles themselves, there are a lot of great like quality of life features among them. Specifically on the Series X side of things, I love being able to quickly switch between any number of games. Obviously Game Pass has just kind of continued to go above and beyond for gaming, but that's not a Series X, related thing. On the Series X versus Series S, I love that there is a next gen option out there that is, a more affordable price point. It's not going to be as graphically much of a powerhouse as your Series X or your PS5, but for a ton of people, typically myself included, who cares? Like, big deal. I can't tell the difference between 1440p and 4K resolution. It's just not how my brain or tech mind is wired. But the features themselves of being able to quickly, like the quick resume functionality of the Series X is great when I am, hopping between a few games. It's something that I like. I really continually wish that that the PS5 had as well at this point, because if I want to switch between a few rounds of Fortnite with Immortals Phoenix Rising or something like that, the extra little bit of time, and admittedly, like PS5's increased load times make this not as huge of an issue, but it'd be cooler if it was just a few seconds to switch between games instead of having to reload and relog in and everything. On the PS5 side of things, I love the DualSense. It's really cool. The haptic feedback of the controllers is great. I haven't played around with the 3D audio as much because I just don't typically game wearing a headset. But I'll try and, like, I see it sitting over there, kind of draped over my PS4 in the station right now. But it was cool. Like, diving into Astro's Playroom was a great experience to really like bring everything together: the 3D audio, the controller, all the cool features of that, and then really like just quick load times is I love having that. I love that I'm not spending as much time in a loading screen checking Twitter, checking my phone. So that's really the biggest thing for me. Some of the next gen games have been cool, but really, as with every console generation, I think like it's going to be a couple of years before we really get to see these things showcase their stuff. And you and I were talking a little bit the other day, like Call of Duty, like seemingly may have been built as a as a PS5, Xbox Series generation game, but at the same time, like, I can go back to, and I remember saying this at some point, because one of the things that maybe even gets lost in the shuffle is the fact that there are options that are all digital options in this generation, and the Xbox had that a little bit late last generation with the Xbox One S all digital version, but Series S and then the PS5 discless are all digital, which means you're even more reliant on memory space on these systems. And Call of Duty games go like how big they were at the beginning of the PS4 generation compared to how big they got at the end of the PS4 generation just makes me like realize, and it's something people are already facing, is like how big these games are at the beginning of the PS5 generation. They're not going to be able to fit on a base level PS5 3 years in, if like their trajectory continues, if they don't really start optimizing their games to accommodate that kind of stuff. So I think that's something that it's too early to tell. I mean, even that, really, I guess it's not, because people are already complaining about how little space there is on the PS5 and how much they're having to like switch between games or try and put stuff on external drives. It's never been something I am too cognizant of, because I typically just I have, I'm very fortunate in that I have great internet access here, and so I can just delete a game and then reinstall it, and it takes at most an hour maybe for if it's a big game, and I'll do that while I'm playing something else. Or both systems now allow you to, through the apps on your phones, you can basically just like have the thing downloading while you wait, and then it's there ready for you to go. So there's a lot of quality of life stuff I think that's great about the new consoles, but I'm just eager to see where it continues to go, and hopefully in 2021 supply chains kind of get back to normal a little bit, and people who want these systems can get them more readily.
You'd have to imagine. I mean,
I would like to see. It's very much like the Switch was kind of in year one of the Switch. I mean, like even going back to like the PS4 and the Xbox One, like those were pretty hard to find that first year if you didn't get like the pre-order rush. And the fact that COVID has complicated things, and that you can't just go to stores and find these things, on a shelf on delivery day. Like it very much has become everybody's trying to buy these things online, which means you're stuck fighting off against bots and all that kind of stuff, and resellers that you wouldn't necessarily be facing if you could just go into a GameStop and pick these up.
I agree. It is an exciting time. I'm excited to see what these new gen consoles, or current gen consoles, whatever we're calling them at this point, can do in 2021 as they really kind of begin to really usher in that next generation. This very much felt like kind of a in between year, especially with how great games have been for what I guess is the last generation of consoles at this point. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited to see kind of where they go from here. I'm excited to get one, hug a little PS5. But we don't have really that much more to say about that because Trevor gave a great report on the ground. The next one, Trevor, I'm not even gonna kid you. I had forgotten this has happened. E3 was canceled. That again, in terms of things that felt like a million years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, E3 was canceled. And like it's weird too because
I mean the articles are back from March. Like the articles are the one I pulled in here, it's like March 11th, which was admittedly like about half a week before I went into quarantine personally. Like that's that in my timeline of things. E3 was canceled in between us getting back from PAX East.
This is what I was going to say.
2 weeks later when I kind of just started working from home and have not gone back to the office since.
Yep. We basically went to the last industry event in PAX East. And
even that we lucked out that there was no major outbreak because it was already starting.
Yeah. And then we got back and the world shut down as it's been for the last 9 months. I was thinking about that again recently where it's like it's so surreal to think back on PAX East and just like I mean if it had been literally a week later it wouldn't have happened kind of thing, right? Like we did get fortunate in that regard.
At PAX East big players pulled out. Sony didn't go to PAX East. Like Nintendo was still there with Animal Crossing, but like Sony backed out very last minute and everybody was like, well, what's going to be at PAX East now? And that was like so wild and unheard of. But then, it just got followed up by everybody. And like, admittedly, Sony already wasn't going to be at E3 because they'd already kind of made their plans clear that they've stepped away from that. But like, there would have been some kind of something E3 week probably for all of the new gen announcements and everything that then just kind of became a scattershot, like pick a random day over the summer and you're gonna like throw a dart at a date at a calendar and you're gonna find some kind of gaming event over the summer. But it was just digital.
And so it was a very surreal one. The bigger one for me that I had a conversation with former input co-host Jarrett Green a lot is just what the future of E3 looks like. And we don't need to get into that too much here because what does the future of a lot of things look like? But I do think it's interesting that, and again, part of this is because 2020 is such a bizarre year, but like a year without an E3, it didn't seem like, certainly I didn't miss it as much as I thought it would. And it was softened a little bit by the fact that we had, next-gen console like showcases as well to help kind of do other things. And we're only like a few weeks off of the Game Awards, which essentially is just like an avenue to show a lot of trailers like E3. But it was interesting kind of the continuous industry-wide thing of like, is E3 done? And like, I very much think there will be some kind of an E3 something next year. But what that looks like, what the scale of it is, what the scope of it is, and what kind of developers and publishers are at an E3 associated event next year and going forward will be very interesting to keep an eye on, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole lot to unpack here because there was a big old conversation around it over the summer of like, God, I miss everything just being in 1 week. Instead of being blown up over an entire summer,
over 3 months.
That was, especially if like trying to cover the stuff, and admittedly, like we're way on the smaller side of things, but even trying to just keep track of what was going on when, like I was getting lost in the shovel of that. So let alone the people like at the bigger sites that are suddenly, instead of crunching for 1 week of E3, they're crunching for 2 months of different conferences and stuff. But I think really at the end of the day, another element of COVID is going to be all of the companies that turned to a digital, like in-house kind of presentation that they did.
Yeah.
They probably almost all saw way lower cost as a result of that and way higher return. So everybody kind of being forced into doing that this year may have opened their eyes in that in past years they may have been a little more reticent to just walk away from E3 because that's where business happens in the industry. So if and admittedly, like on a smaller scale, there's a ton of stuff that still needs to happen at E3. Developers kind of getting to meet with, you know, Sony or Microsoft and kind of try and show off and sell their game and all that stuff. Like, there's no great easy way of just kind of replicating that in a all digital interface. But I think you know, the PR marketing machines probably looked great for a bunch of the companies this year when they all had their own spotlight, their own day. And yeah, some of that might have been lost in the shuffle, but you know, companies were like, I think if they set expectations appropriately or just get out there and kind of like stake their claim on a day and say, this is the day we're going to be showing off all of our, you know, upcoming slate of things. I think from a kind of, I think it's much more kind of going to open up the floodgates. I think this year opened up the floodgates, and I think we're just going to see more of that next year. So even if E3 comes back, we're just going to see more and more people that are going to do their own thing and not pay the ESA the ridiculous fees to you know, host their booth at the convention center.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, like PAX, I'm very confident. PAX are back and better than ever, and that kind of style show will be very strong going forward. And E3 is much more complicated, right? Because, I mean, really, I think to some degree this started with like PSX, where Sony saw like, oh, if we just do it by ourselves, we get all the media attention, we get all of the profit, right? Like, it's all just on us. We're not sharing it with like a million other games and publishers and developers. And then PlayStation stopped in PSX, which I still will never quite understand. But and I think it kind of gave them, they did eventually like stop going, and other kind of other developers stopped kind of attending and wanted to do their own thing. And it just makes sense, right? Like, I think 2020 has been a big year for showing that like doing things online, making things digital, making things where you don't need to be in one central location. Again, this could be its own topic. Whether it's working from home remotely, whether it's not having a giant conference with like 15 other developers, makes sense for certain kind of people, right? It makes sense for certain kind of groups and teams. And I think, again, that to me is why I'm like, E3 will exist. Obviously, I've always been someone who said like E3 is not going to die. Like, the developer side of it, I think, will always be important, and talking to other kind of larger publishers. But I am curious if it actually does almost become more of an actual like trade show kind of thing.
I mean,
and then
maybe that's why there's actually been such crazy shortages, is because Sony and Microsoft weren't able to like sit down with the buyers at Walmart and Target and Best Buy and say, here's the rollout plan for our new systems this year. That probably would have been, you know, significant meetings at E3.
I can assure you there would have been, and so that it is interesting to see if it almost has returned to its roots a little bit and become kind of more of a trade show like it was back in the 90s, because I could kind of see it going in that route. But we will shift gears a little bit. Our next topic, Trev, again, in a different year would have been, I feel like, so much bigger news. But a little old place called Microsoft bought Bethesda. And it's kind of, I feel like, happening in a little bit of like the past few years. Microsoft is kind of like flexing a little bit and like gobbling up more and more of like these kind of style things, as it tries to, I think, build up some sort of like first party studio thing to maybe attempt to begin to try to rival PlayStation, and B, to try to kind of increase its share of the market in general. Trev, what were kind of your thoughts and reactions on Microsoft's purchase of Bethesda?
So one thing I'm trying to check right now, because I don't know if they've actually like closed the deal yet.
The deal might not be closed, everyone.
Yeah, it was
get your money, PlayStation.
It was a thing back in September. Yeah, it was that they they announced the plan to acquire Bethesda. But then there's the whole, like, those kinds of big level acquisitions take time and all that stuff. And honestly, I still don't, like, I'm not seeing if there's been any follow up on it of like, yes, they have formally acquired ZeniMax, because it's all just like they plan to, and that was kind of the whole thing. But regardless of like if the deal has closed or not, the fact that Microsoft is basically taking one of the big third-party studios, like one of the other studios that was big enough to have their own E3 conference for the last few years, like off the table and bringing them completely in-house, is exactly what like Microsoft has needed to do. And what they have been doing since 2016, 2017 at E3, when they announced like we've acquired these 5 studios and we're kicking off the initiative, which now we finally know what game they're working on in the new Perfect Dark and all that stuff. Because that's the big thing, that as great as Game Pass has been, Microsoft hasn't had, like, at the fact that Microsoft's selling point is like all of our first party games will go to Game Pass. It hasn't had a ton this last generation because they didn't have a lot of first party studios producing work, and all of that, those acquisitions and stuff have taken time to get those next games up and running. So we're now positioned to see them really kind of hit the ground, hopefully running this generation. But even that, like, with Halo Infinite kind of being kicked to fall of 2021, like, I still don't know what the next Microsoft Studios game coming to Xbox is, because it takes time to get all this stuff together. But so having a studio like Bethesda, where and it's still up in the air where they're actually going to go with this, and this is a large reason of why they can't be committal, because it affects the acquisition and the purchase of everything. They can't say yes, all Bethesda games are going to like only launch on Microsoft. But if they end up doing that, that is the studio behind the Fallout and Skyrim series. That is the studio behind Doom, behind the Dishonored games. Just like so many like great, especially single player focused games. Now all theoretically their next iteration is going to be, if not exclusive to Xbox, they're going to be on Game Pass, and they're going to be a giant seller for Game Pass. Fact that,
have to imagine,
because it is, the thing that's great about that is if I want to play the next like Elder Scrolls 6 or Fallout 5 or whatever the next big open world RPG from Bethesda is, that's going to be really tough to just do and see everything in a month. So I'm going to buy the subscription, and I'm probably going to keep that subscription for at least a couple months, because that's how long it will take me to sit down and play through those games. Versus even a Doom Eternal, I guess you could be like, all right, I'm going to buy the Game Pass for $15, and then I can let it slide. But if you have all of those studios kind of combined and kind of giving a constant output of work, there's continuously a reason to keep your Game Pass subscription. I think the fact that an acquisition of this size and scale happened or is happening is definitely a huge shakeup. It is, the video game equivalent of Disney acquiring Marvel or Disney acquiring Star Wars or something like that. And admittedly, Microsoft is acquiring Bethesda for more than Disney paid for either of those two franchises. So just goes to show what we kind of talk about often, but often gets overlooked or overthought because games are looked at as a less of industry.
They're for kids. Yeah.
Games, I will say, just saw like a report the other day of like games, the amount of money that games made this year or is projected to make here in 2020 surpasses the amount of money of films and sports combined. So like the revenue for both of those industries don't even add up to be the amount of revenue in games. So gaming is here to stay, and seeing kind of the one big company buy another big company, kind of crazy to see it this year.
$60-$70 a game, that'll do it to you, man. There's no movie that's going to be $70 $70 a film, and no sporting event's at $70 usually, unless you're going to the Super Bowl. And so yeah, I mean, it's the video game industry is a force, and it seems a little silly to still have that conversation of like, video games are just a fad, they'll go away, when it's been around for 40 years and is now bigger than movies and bigger than sports. But nonetheless, we still have the conversation, and the video game industry still desperately acts at times like it needs to prove itself. Trevor, you added these last two actually
during the show, yeah.
Yeah, so I will throw it to you for both of these, but we'll start with the Ubisoft harassment scandal that kind of rocked Ubisoft throughout the year.
Yeah, so the Ubisoft harassment, this is, and it's something obviously we felt a little bit kind of at a more personal level here at That Nerdy Site, but it kicked off the conversation around harassment in gaming, and we saw kind of gaming have its Me Too movement as a result of that, and yeah, a lot of that centered around kind of Ubisoft people kind of like really finally being shown the door, and really kind of purged in a very public fashion. But it wasn't only Ubisoft, but that was kind of the focal point that I really honed in on, in particular because of how poorly they responded to it, and how repeatedly they would come out and in their Ubisoft forwards not have a comment about it, or they would do like a separate thing that wasn't included in their marketing thing, and that was infuriating to see over and over again in the investigations that they've been doing and all that stuff. And it tied back to, and we talked about it earlier, but I had specifically pulled out a couple of in the Black Lives Matter conversation of things, as a counterpoint to how badly Ubisoft handled it. You had Destiny 2 in a showcase. They had dedicate the first 8 minutes and was it 13 seconds to like moment of silence in honor of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and that was like the first gaming kind of thing after that, and the fact that they were willing to shine a spotlight on that for the hundreds of thousands of people that were tuning into their presentation was great. The fact that Call of Duty put in it as kind of a header before like logging into, was it Warzone or whatever the big Call of Duty game was, like Black Lives Matter in that game, in arguably one of the biggest games in the industry,
in the entire world,
that they were shining a spotlight on it, brought this global conversation that was happening into our space in a really important way. And so kind of that juxtaposed with how bungled Ubisoft kind of continued to be in how they were addressing kind of the harassment that got like a spotlight shown on them, and the fact that it had been a cover up that had been going on for years and years and years, and the fact that a lot of those people, when they were finally let go, if they were let go, were still let go with, complete access to their stock options and all that stuff. And so they're still going to benefit from the work that Ubisoft's doing. And obviously it's unfortunate because we, know people personally that work at Ubisoft and are, the good new class coming in and trying to change things from within. But the fact that like, I look at Ubisoft this year as kind of another kind of turning point in not only the crunch side of things, but in harassment in the industry,
workplace culture,
and hopefully we will see things, but we also have to hold them more accountable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, like so much this year, it is a thing of being optimistic and hopeful at the progress that's been made and the conversations that are being had, while also still holding everyone accountable, including ourselves, on those promises and on that progress, and to kind of push for a better, more inclusive games industry, and just the country and world in general. But I think the Ubisoft has long been a place that I think seems like it would. I'll say this: Ubisoft's response in the wake of everything didn't shock me at all. They kind of always had the vibe that that's how they would maybe react to something like this, and then to see that that's how they react to something like this, didn't really surprise me.
I mean, they were brushing it under the rug for years. So what's one more like press conference?
Like you said, we know, plenty of people who work at Ubisoft, and I am very much hopeful and optimistic in both those people's abilities to enact change and also the larger kind of class of newer people at Ubisoft and older people who've always tried to bring about change, to really help change the culture and the workplace at Ubisoft. Because as one of kind of the premier gaming entities, they absolutely should have their feet held to the fire and be held accountable for what is happening within their workspaces and hallways. And so you can be assured that we will probably have a kind of conversation around it again in the new year at some point in time. I'm sure as the industry at large does. But that was a very good addition, I think, Trevor. And again, just the issue of harassment and toxicity and harassment in games in general is one that always needs to be a conversation that's being had, always needs to be a discussion needs to be had, and like kind of reference from that nerdy site to beyond, those are conversations that we're always trying to have and always trying to help play a part in bringing about the healthiest kind of game and community possible. And so very good suggestion. Leading to the next one, which is Epic suing Apple.
Yeah, just this is
a thing.
Again, this is a thing that in everything else that happened in 2020, I'd completely forgotten about this until we were talking about Microsoft buying Bethesda, and it was like, one giant corporation, buying another giant corporation. Wait, didn't we have a similar yet opposite thing? Oh, that's right. Epic did their whole stupid free Fortnite thing, which is still ongoing, and they basically
Greg got some like stuff mailed to him recently.
Yeah, obviously they kind of in response to God, I don't even remember what they were responding to at this point initially, but it was like something at the Apple the iOS store keeping somebody off their platform or something like that. Or restricting people's access, whatever it was, and kind of Epic really kind of laid a stake in the thing by saying like we're gonna subvert the online stores of Microsoft of Apple and of Google, and we're gonna let you buy V-Bucks directly through us. Here's how to do it, and flagrantly violating the terms of services from both things. So the game gets pulled off of a system, or pulled off of both things, and they already had their propaganda free Fortnite 1984 Apple parody ad all ready to go, and basically filed suit against Apple shortly thereafter. So yeah, that is an absurd thing that is still going on, and And then as a result, it saw Epic's kind of like creator license, I think, from the Apple Store basically being like squandered, which meant like anybody who uses Epic and Unity, is it, I think, was at risk of being affected by that as well. So like it just kind of like it grew into this giant pissing match between billion-dollar companies, and the fact that Epic is like, please side with us, peons that we don't really care about, is absurd, and like do it, and I hope it leads to a better revenue split, and Apple did kind of come out and say that starting in 2021, companies of some threshold or fewer are going to see a better split. Great. But yeah, it was just another one of those big crazy stories of 2020.
Epic and suing Apple and the whole free Fortnite thing just smacks, and it's always to me smacked of just like the most like gamer bro, like piss, like you said, piss and match politics. Like these two like gamer frat bro guys, just like kind of energy to it throughout, and the free Fortnite thing just is like the epitome of that to me. They're probably chugging gamer fuel in the corner. It just seems like the most sophomoric element of the games industry, and I've hated it from the beginning because both sides are just as guilty. Both sides somehow like Epic in particular just went about it in the most like weirdly juvenile way possible, even though that they're like they have good arguments. They just like present it in such a poor way. I
Yeah,
think.
I would say actually like Epic really is as much as I like don't, and I'm not defending Apple because Apple's practices are kind of crap in
Yeah.
this area, but the fact that Epic is deliberately trying to weaponize its
Yep.
admittedly very young player base in Fortnite, and you know, I say young while I also came back to Fortnite this year, so I'm kind of like against the mold or whatever, but like the fact that they were targeting people, and the people that they're targeting don't even understand the context of the 1984 ad that was parodied and all that stuff, like, is a very gross thing. And it also like they also did wage this pissing match without regard to the players that were going to be affected. Like, there are probably people that have not gone back to Fortnite as a result of all that because they didn't have access to it anymore on their device. And that's like a load of crap. Like they did this whole very performative thing that again is propagandizing like their player base and really kind of building off of that thing we see all too often of, you know, players and again gamers TM, you know, ready to anger and ready to raise their pitchforks out against like a common enemy. It's like these are like both of these companies want to just take your money from you. Like, neither of them are on your side. But Fortnite's going to pretend they're on your side and pretend they're the champions for justice in this because of a PR decision that they've made.
Yeah, it's just we can be better. We can be better than these sort of I think feuds in the way they've gone about them. But we'll end the Epic Sue and Apple thing there. Go watch the actual 1984 trailer. It's pretty good.
Which, admittedly, like even that, there's a whole bunch of layers to 1984 trailer at this point because the Apple that they fought against, and that's what like Epic is trying to say with their whole campaign is that the Apple that their 1984 ad fought against is not the Apple that exists today. Like Apple has become the thing they hated.
But that will do it, I believe, for all of our stories here.
Yeah, I didn't add anything else in there.
The last thing that I'm going to add is just a story of the year is That Nerdy Side itself. Like we had kind of talked about a month or so ago, we've now kind of crossed that 1 year threshold where we're 13 months old now, going to be 14 months soon here. And our own journey and progress. We've grown and expanded and shrank and kept charging ahead. We've launched new shows, and it has been a fulfilling, rewarding, challenging, exciting journey all the way through it. Whenever me and Trevor sat back in the summer and fall of last year and began to kind of pitch ideas back and forth of what That Nerdy would be, it has evolved and gone different directions than I could have imagined. We have had countless articles, podcasts, features, reviews, launched all across the site in that time span. We had a lot of podcasts at one point in time.
I mean, as it is, like we're mostly podcasts at this point with very little. Like we've all kind of stepped back on the writing side of things. I think in part because we're all busy or we're just working in quarantine. Certainly it has made me less inclined to sit down and actually write something out. But yeah, especially this podcast, I don't remember when we launched it, but it's been going for at least half the year. That D Plus show launched day one of 2020 here. So we just hit our Muppet Christmas Carol episode last week was episode 52. So we've had a full year of that D Plus show going. And basically, especially since November when we kind of did anniversary, even before that, we've been doing 3 shows a week for at least most of this year. But starting November, we have been doing like daily content during the weekdays, kind of supplementing the 3 podcasts a week with kind of Let's Plays over on the YouTube channel. So that's been kind of great. And I definitely think about that, every now and then where I'm like, I'm producing 3 podcasts per week. Like that's a weird thing. But I'm very happy with kind of the
Let's
output
Plays
we've
as
had.
well. Yeah, and it's a constant work in progress. We're constantly building and doing new things and trying to tackle new challenges. I'm very excited for where the new year will take us. And the last thing I want to say is simply that you're kind of referencing the Ubisoft harassment thing is my own thing. And the promise I made on this podcast 6 months ago, which was to be better, to have all of you who are listening to this podcast, who support That Nerdy, who know me personally or know me on Twitter, who don't know me at all, but just came across some stuff in June, to hold me accountable and to rise to the challenge to be a better person, to be a better, I think, coworker and editor and member within the games industry, who demands a more inclusive and better workplace culture. I'd like to think that we at That Nerdy have seen the industry itself kind of have very serious, frank, real conversations, and we've had them ourselves internally and externally. And I like to think that I myself have had those conversations and have helped to play some sort of role and have some sort of growth. If not, you're more than free to tell me. I would love to have those conversations with you. But in a very real way, we've very much tried to reflect the industry we want to see going forward, and that will only continue into 2021 and beyond that as well. That said, that is the show. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like Trevor said, we got all kinds of Patreon goals and tiers and goodies there. If I say so myself, the last few Patreon exclusive episodes have very much been worth the dollar. Me and Trevor are going to be recording one here soon. Probably tomorrow, probably the day you listen to this, I might be recording it. It's going to be a banger. Just trust me on that.
Yeah, we don't know what it's going to be about yet, but yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea. We don't have any idea yet. It's kind of a fun one. Like, we usually have them pretty locked in. So it's going to be a fun little conversation, I'm sure. Maybe its own kind of look back at 2020 in some way. Or maybe we just say, fuck that noise. But again, you can go find us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons have, who have kept the lights on and, like Trevor said, have made this entire enterprise happen, and in particular this show as well as that D Plus show happen, and we are very grateful for that. We do not take it for granted, the fact that we get to do this and that people give us money. We like it. So you can go find us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can also go like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends all across the internet. Rate and review us. Give us those 5 stars on iTunes. Tell your friends and family. We're trying to be bigger and better and do more fun things, and that'll help spread the good word about That News You Care About and That Nerdy Site in general. You can go find all of us all across the internet and the social medias. Trevor, you can go find at Trevor J. Starkey. Trevor, anything you want to shout out, plug, or just say as a final ode to 2020 here?
I will give a last little shout out to our month of holiday stuff over at That D Plus show. If you are not willing to let go of the holiday mood, we have 4 episodes there on holiday movies, and that was fun. I think I've already got some ideas for like which ones to try and tackle next Christmas time.
I do as well. Yeah.
So that was fun. Also, you can check out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thatnerdysite. I uploaded today as we're recording, so yesterday as of this going live, my Legend of Zelda Let's Play, which I talk about in the episode. I basically sat down and recorded 20 minutes of failing at Legend of Zelda first and said, this is like, if I ever release it, like there's not even an outro. I just kind of like, I just hit stop recording at one point because I was like, this is just not good content. So I stepped away from that, went and looked at a guide so I could actually figure out what I'm doing, because that game is obtuse as hell. And I know it's something I mention in the first version, is talking to you about how bad that game is from a 2020 lens. I don't think it made it into like the final edit. But yeah,
I'll be sure to leave a YouTube comment about it. Don't
worry.
There
you go. Yeah. Legend of Zelda is a great game when you had Nintendo Power, or it's something I think about especially as I've been going through a lot of these NES classic games. Like, I wonder how much money Nintendo made off of their $2.99 a minute help tip lines that they had in that era, in a pre-internet, like wikis guide kind of era. Like, what percentage of business? It probably wasn't a lot, but like, what percentage of their business was dedicated to, giving people like, oh yeah, here's where you need to go in The Legend of Zelda. Because it's absurd how just like, oh, you have to know that just 5 bushes in, you have to just light that on fire, or oh, you can blow. Like, I knew the screen where there was like a hidden secret thing, and I tried dropping a bomb somewhere and nothing blew up, and I was like, well, screw it. All right, I must be on the wrong spot. I must be misremembering it. And then when I look at the guide later, I was like, no, I was just 1 square off, and it didn't. So I was like, I hate this. I hate this so much. So, So the much better version that's out there is, after I went down, looked at a guide to know, how to go get a couple extra heart pieces and then go do the first dungeon. So you can go find that on the YouTube channel, as well as any number of our other Let's Plays out there.
Yeah. You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Logie on the internet, LOGGY. I mean, The Legend of Zelda is not great. Like, it's a fine video game. Like, I made it a point. I pulled a Trevor Starkey and beat a video game a few years back to make my point about this, after much bemoaning from many people I know in the games industry who were upset that I hadn't beat it, in particular the guys who write 2-player co-op. And like, it's fine. It's like fine. It's like fine. I've never said that the game was bad. I still get like crow about this years later, but like, it's a fine video game. It's not really fun at all, I would argue, if you don't have a guide in front of you. If you've not played this game before, you don't have a guide in front of you, you're gonna hate this game so soon. It's fine. Go watch Trevor's Let's Play. I will be sure to leave a comment or two. Maybe they're snarky, maybe they're not. Who knows? But Trevor's content in general over on the YouTube channel, the Let's Plays, is very good. I always recommend it. I think I mentioned it last week, but during Christmas break for me, I've just been binging a lot of the episodes again. They're very good. They're just a lot of fun. I just enjoy the aspect of seeing Trevor Starkey on my laptop screen and him playing video games. It's a nice, very therapeutic for me, as he also is frustrated by these NES games. But so I always recommend that. Otherwise, I will just say stay tuned, because we're now in it where very soon we'll be having lots of Game of the Year content up on the site, and probably Decade of the Year, Generation of the List, whatever content on the site as well.
Best of last gen, because we did Best of the Decade last year.
Yeah, thank you. And so stay tuned for that as well. We'll have all kinds of content. We'll probably have the editorial team get together maybe this weekend and have some conversations, talk about it in Slack. So stay tuned for all of that goodness. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. Otherwise, for myself, for Trevor, and for the That Nerdy Site family at large, have a happy new year. Again, if this is the last time I hear from you, happy birthday to me, and play your games and be good to each other.